Can you hear me? Great. Okay. With Siyata Dishmaya, we are moving on to the next Mishnah. So we are on Perek Shlishi, Mishnah Hey. Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana Omer, Kol makabel alav ol Torah, ma'avirin mimenu ol malchus ve'ol derech eretz. Ve'kol porek mimenu ol Torah, notnim alav ol malchus ve'ol derech eretz. So a simple read of the Mishnah goes like this. Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, who by the way Chazal attribute to being one of the Mekubalim, there's a Sefer of Kabbalah called the Sefer HaBahir, which is one of the deepest Svarim of Kabbalah. There is an English translation by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan of that. For those who are, well, I would say that if you should be learning Kabbalah, you should probably be speaking Hebrew or Aramaic already, but nonetheless, there is an English translation for those who wish to dabble in the deeper sources so long as they have finished all of the revealed Torah. So Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, he wrote, Kol makabel alav ol Torah, anyone who accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah, ma'avirin mimenu ol malchus, they take away from him the yoke of being under a malchus, as part of a nation, the ol derech eretz, and the ol of derech eretz. Let's see what that means in a second. And then he says the flip side, the kol porek mimenu ol Torah, but anyone who abandons from himself the yoke of Torah, then notnim alav ol malchus ve'ol derech eretz. It's a little hard to understand. You know, if you were learning Gemara now, the natural question would be, there would be a contradiction between the Reish and the Sefer. What about the middle ground? Is it what's the default here? Is the default that you have derech eretz, or you don't have derech eretz, and you have to accept Torah, or do you have to reject Torah? But what the Medrash Shmuel writes, and this is also implied within Rabbeinu Yonah, is that there really are three levels. There's three levels, and our Mishnah is only giving the two extremes. So the middle level, which our Mishnah doesn't speak about, is...
Ravi?
Yes.
Can you please repeat the question?
Sure. If you look at the Reisha, it says, if you're makabel ol Torah, meaning the default is that you don't have it, but you makabel it, then they will remove from you the ol malchus and ol derech eretz. Meaning the default is that you don't have Torah, but you do have ol malchus and ol derech eretz. And you have to do an active accepting Torah in order to remove the malchus and derech eretz. We haven't defined what those are yet, but that's the default way you're starting. But if you look at the Sefer, it seems like the opposite. From the Sefer, it seems like the default is that you have Torah, and the problem is that you reject it. Kol porek mimenu ol Torah, right? And again, here in the Sefer, the default is you don't have ol malchus and ol derech eretz. But if you do a bad thing by rejecting the old Torah, then you'll get punished by being given it to you. So the default of the Reish and the default of the Sefer seem the opposite. The default of the Reish is you don't have Torah, but you do have malchus and derech eretz. And the default of the Sefer is that you do have Torah and you don't. Is it clear? Is that point clear? So the two seem to contradict, the Reish and the Sefer. But the way that the Medrash Shmuel and the implication of Rabbeinu Yonah is that really there are three levels. And the Mishnah is not describing the middle level, but let us describe it. The default, and this is where most people are, unless you do one of these two acts, the default is that people do learn Torah and they do keep mitzvahs, but they haven't accepted upon themselves Torah as an ol, meaning it's not a higher form. We have to see exactly what we're going to define it clearer as we go along. They haven't done a higher form, and because they haven't done that higher form of accepting Torah as an ol, then they still are stuck with malchus and derech eretz. That's what you learn from the Reisha. And from the Sefer is that if someone does a very negative act of outwardly rejecting Torah, that's a bad move. And then they'll come and they'll give you an extra portion of malchus and derech eretz. Meaning that the default is that let's call her a regular average person, someone who hasn't worked on himself but is not a Rasha, someone who is learning Torah but not in a way that's considered an old Torah, he will have a certain portion of subjugation to derech eretz and to malchus, and only as long as he hasn't rejected it, he won't get extra. There's like a normal, natural portion. Okay, as we go into it and more define it more, this will become clearer. So there are three levels. There's a level where you accept all Torah. There's a level where you keep Torah, but you don't accept all Torah. And there's a level where you reject all Torah, which is the lowest level, which is a harsh one. So let's read together the Rabbeinu Yonah, and from that we'll take it and give more, and the Rambam, and we'll get clearer definitions. So it says Rabbeinu Yonah, Achar she'oseh haTorah ikar, u'malachto arai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishmerenu mikol ra, ve'yishmor et nafsho, shelo yitztarech levatel milimud Torah. So let's try and understand this. It seems like there's a level of learning Torah where you haven't devoted yourself to Torah, you just learn Torah. Let's say, as an example, someone who's kovea itim l'Torah, where he has his hour a day where he learns, and in theory he could learn other times in the day, but he already has given his portion. He's done his, however much time he devotes to his learning Torah. Let's say he has a shir that he goes to once a day, whatever it is that he's done, he's given that. And now he's done his obligation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to me, V'agi sabo yomam v'layla, and I do my half an hour in the morning and my half an hour in the evening, and I'm Yotzei Zayin, and I'm very good. But this is not talking about a person who's devoting himself to Torah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu works with us midah keneged midah. And if he sees that we are giving that much over to Torah, then he'll also give us the ability to do that. What happens if you have a person who wants to go more, he wants to go beyond, he wants to devote himself to Torah beyond the natural state, not just a given fixed time in the morning and in the evening, but rather he wants to give himself over totally to Torah, to make his Torah the Ikar. So here comes Rabbeinu Yonah and says, Hashem will guard him that he won't need to mavatal Torah. Meaning, according to the desire that a person has of learning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will enable that learning to take place and give him the space, the ability, the financial ability, the time, the mindset in order to do that. What if a person doesn't? Then the rule is you're always going to be subjugated to something. What you're subjugated to is your choice. So if a person isn't subjugated to the Ol of Torah, he's not devoting himself and giving himself over to Torah, then there are two other Ols, two other points of subjugation that a person will be given to. Now I want to take a little deeper explanation now, and then we'll come back to Rabbeinu Yonah. And what I'm saying now is based on the Maharal. The Maharal writes it very clearly and very insightfully. The Maharal says there are three levels of existence. Three modes of how to relate to the world. And this, if you think of this point deeply, you'll be able to locate yourself, and it'll be a great tool for you to, at any given point in your life, identify where you're holding on each of these three levels. So I'm going to go from lowest to highest. That doesn't mean that the lowest is bad and the highest is good necessarily. It just means the lowest is more base and the highest is more holy. Sometimes you can have something which is lower. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's low, as we'll see as we're going to go through. So there's a lowest level of world, of existence, which is the nature of world as HaKadosh Baruch Hu put nature into form, which runs all on a cause and effect level. You plant a seed and the seed grows, it sprouts, it blossoms. There's a natural order of the world. There's a cycle of nature. There's a cycle of the weather, precipitation cycle. There's a cycle of the animals, of which higher form can eat the lower form, and then how everything goes back and decays, and then it creates more food, and there's a cycle of the world, which is a natural cycle. And the word cycle is very good, because cycle implies there's no beginning, there's no end, there's no meaning, there's no purpose. It's just a cycle of nature that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put into creation, and that functions and that works. That's the lowest level of the world. There's no real room for man to be involved on this level, other than just using the laws of nature to plant and to reap. But otherwise, you're just basically, this is a harsh thing to say, but you're basically like a more developed animal in that chain of cycle of the food chain, where we're all involved in a natural level of the world. That's the lowest level. And people who view the world in this way, you'll hear them saying things like, what can you do? Ma la'asot. Like that's the type of phrase they'll use. They'll say, yeah, that's just the way things are. That's the way of life. And nothing you can do about that, because they view the world as determined. They view the world as that's just the way it is. That's the way things are. That's how things happen. if someone big and mean harms them, they'll say, yeah, those are bad people, and that just happens, nothing you can do about it. And they don't see themselves as able to go out of their natural box. Those are also type of people who, if they get angry, they'll express it because in an unhealthy way, because they say, yeah, that's just what I feel. Well, I have to be real with what I feel. I must tell a terrible story. Certain individual that I hadn't met for a long time, and it's probably good that I hadn't met him, because when I had interactions with him, they often weren't positive. And I met him at some point in some place, and I was polite but not overly engaging, because I knew that it wasn't always words of Torah that came out of his mouth, and I wanted to just remain pure. So he came up to me later, and he was extremely harsh, very, very accusing and blaming. And what he was saying at that time, which was full of blame, was how I don't care and I didn't take an interest, and like a lot of very harsh words, including swear words, and not someone who learned in yeshiva, let's say. So later on, he sent me. So before Rosh Hashanah, like I wasn't sure what to do. So I sent him a text message just saying, I apologize for the interaction that we had. I hope we're on good terms. And I didn't want to create a relationship really, but I also didn't want to be on bad terms either. So I left it there. So then he wrote back to me. He says, this is his text message he wrote back. He just says, I just say things the way they are. That's what he said. I just say things the way they are. Meaning everything that he wanted to share with me was the way things are. That's just the way things are. And you have to be natural. You just have to go with what you feel and be natural and say things are. He about a year later, he got divorced. I know him through his wife mainly. So through his friend of his wife's. So, and then I got a picture of maybe why a person who has that attitude, it's going to be a challenge to live with. Because if you live on a natural world, that means that if you get angry, you hit, and if you're upset, then you say it, and you don't do anything about it to improve, because that's not the level the world's on. The world is basically, you're an animal. So there's a nature and order to the world. So that's level number one, the lowest level of functioning in the world. Now, level number two is a world where people realize that everything is not determined, but rather you can have a hand in developing the world. There's free choice. You can make choices. You can develop yourself. You can bring the world to a higher level. This is where the world of technology comes in. This is where the whole world of everything you would learn in university here would come into this. Any skill that you could develop, any profession that you could develop, a hierarchy of law and order, a democracy, everything can function where man is using his free will. He's not just saying that's the way of the world, just that's natural. No, you say you as a man have free choice. You can enforce your will in the world in a positive way or a negative way as well. But there's the ability to make choices. You can make positive or negative choices. You can be involved. You can be productive. You can be proactive. You can be constructive. There's developing the world, and you can be an engineer. You can be a rabbi. You can be a psychologist. You can take control. You can do many good things in the world. That's level number two. So the lowest level is natural. Everything is determined. The second level, let's call it the level of choice, where you can make choices, you can develop things, advance things. That's the level number two. Now, just pause on these two levels for a minute. Everyone is subject to these two levels. Everyone has nature. There's a level of nature that you're determined by. You have to eat, you have to work in order to earn money, in order to have food, in order to get clothing. You have a body which has a natural cycle. It's a world of nature. You're bound to it. You're subjugated to it. That's the level you're on. And because you're obligated to nature, that means you're going to have to work for parnasa. You're going to have to get a degree, perhaps. You're going to have to be involved in the physical world. And very good. That's level number one. Now, everyone is also subjugated to level number two. We live in a society. There are taxes. Taxes are taken in order to pay for the lighting on the streets and to pay for police to try and protect you from all those people on the streets who are not so caring about your health or your shops or anything else that makes logical sense to be law and order. So your taxes go to, people who believe in society and believe in law and order, right? So they will recognize their subject. Not everyone agrees to that, I hear. But people who believe there's law and order and there's a system, they will recognize that they're subjugated to that system, and they'll work and they'll pay taxes and they'll recognize rules and law and order. They'll keep the speed limit. They'll do everything they need to do. They'll make a choice to keep that law and order in order to function well within a system. And paying those taxes is one of those basic human obligations that we have in order to keep the society functioning hardly. That's level number 2. So we are all obligated on lowest level number 1 and middle level number 2. Now here's where it gets a bit supernatural. There's a highest level where you can be supernatural. You can be out of this world. If you, now we're going a bit spooky now, but hold on with me. Everything that you see in this world, you're only bound to by the degree that you accept yourself to be bound to it. But that doesn't mean you can choose not to pay taxes and say, I'm not bound to taxes. But it does mean that the more you are close to Hashem and connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is above the system, beyond the system, he's the one who creates the system, then you can rise above the system and not be obligated to that same degree to the lowest 2 levels. The more you're connected to Hashem, the less you're obligated to those 2 levels. Now, you're always obligated, don't get me wrong. There's always going to be a sense of subjugation to something. But on the lowest level, you'll be subject to your base desires, and that could lead to very bad things. A person could go and do a jihad in the name, or go and do Gilui Arayos, Shvichus Damim, in the name of, that's what my base desires are calling me to do. That's what I feel obligated towards. I have an all on me. I have a subjugation on me of my base desires, and I have to follow them. That would be the lowest base level. Then you'll have the middle level of a person who's obligated to society and paying taxes. Then you have a highest level. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that all rabbis are exempt from paying taxes, but I am quoting the Gemara that says that Talmid Chachamim are potter from taxes, certain taxes. We have to understand that. We have to understand that concept, what that means. The Gemara says, I think it's in Baba Basra, you've probably just learned it. The Gemara says that there are taxes which are put on the nation for shmirah, to take care and to guard, but Talmid Chachamim who are learning Torah and are connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they have risen above that level of needing this world shmirah, the guarding of this world, because they're directly connected to the source. They're directly connected to Hashem. Now, anyone who's ever learned Nefesh HaChaim, he has a keta there where he explains the most amazing thing. I think I spoke about this once in a tish or sometime. I definitely spoke about it in the last 2 years at some point. The concept of Ein Od Milvado. It's in Nefesh HaChaim. I think it's Perek Sheni, section Sheni, Perek Yud Gimel or Yud Daled. He speaks there about the following idea. If you see yourself as natural and in this world, and you subjugate yourself to this world, then there are rules and laws and order to the world. There's statistics and there's bad people out there who may come to harm. But if you see yourself as connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're connected to a higher being, a higher force, then you can be out of the system, beyond the system. And what the Nefesh HaChaim says, that the shortcut to that, and there's no shortcut, you have to develop a great level of emunah, but the phrase, which is a shortcut, which can enable you to rise above the rules of nature, is the phrase Ein Od Milvado, which is not some hocus pocus catchphrase, but rather it's a expressing emunah that everything in this world is emanating from Hashem. Let's go through our Mishnah now according to the Maharal and get a much deeper understanding of it. Rabbi Nechonya ben Akana Omer, Kol HaMakabel Alav Ol Torah. A person's always going to be subject to something. You're always going to be obligated to something in the world. You can choose what it is. If you choose to subjugate yourself to Torah, to a higher level, to a higher form, so now you go out of the system of this world. You connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Now please note, I want to make an important diuk. It doesn't say, Kol HaLomed Torah. It doesn't say, Kol HaOsek BeTorah. Because we're speaking here about something a lot deeper. We're not just speaking about someone who sees Torah as another mitzvah and does another mitzvah. We're speaking here about someone who's Mekabel all Torah. That means he lives in a world of connection to Hashem. He only answers up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's subject to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. An example of this, which is very appropriate. I have two things to say today which support what we're saying. One is to do with the 9 days, and one is to do with Parshas Shavua. It worked out very well. So to do with the 9 days is a famous Gemara that people quote around Tisha B'Av, which is, what is the reason for the Chorban? Shelo barchu b'Torah tchila. They didn't make the bracha of Torah tchila. They didn't make Birkus HaTorah. And the Maharal says in his Chidushim, what's the big deal about not making a bracha on Torah? It's one particular specific mitzvah. They missed a bracha. Missing a bracha is a bittul mitzvahs aseh, or maybe a bittul d'Rabbanan. That's the reason for not having the Torah. But the Maharal says, when you learn Torah, that means you see Torah as a mitzvah. When you make a bracha on Torah, then you realize that your Torah is what gives you a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because the bracha that Chazal say it was referring to was, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'nasan lanu es Toraso. It's not just about learning Torah, it's about the recognition that Hashem is the one who gave the Torah. The realization that when you learn Torah, you're connecting to the one who gives it. You're connecting to the source. So what Chazal was saying was the reason why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed is not because they weren't learning Torah, they were learning. But because they didn't recognize that their learning of Torah means that they're under the Shilton Hashem. That they're connecting back everything to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That you're in a world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's the one whose world you're in. That's the old Torah. It's not just learning Torah, it's not just osek with Torah, but it's you recognize that the only one you answer up to, the only one you're scared of, the only one who you're in awe of, the only one who you love, and every way that you function in this world is all an emanation of your sense of obligation to Hashem. A little bit like anyone who's read the book Halachic Man of Rabbi Soloveitchik along that theme, where everything you see with the eyes of halacha. Everything you see in the world, even things that look to be natural, you see them as a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And when you see things which are historical events, you ask yourself, what was Hashem's message to me? And when you see things which are your own personal suffering, you recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending you a message. And when you see things good that are happening to you, you immediately, naturally turn to Hashem and thank Him because you recognize it's from Him. Your whole world, your whole way of thinking is old Torah. You're under the obligation of Hashem. That's how you see everything in the world and how you relate to it all. If you do that, you don't need the other all. Ma'avirin mimenu, they pass from you. You don't need to be under the all of Malchus, which is referring to the government, referring to the system, the community, the society. You don't need to be under these extra taxes that they put on regular people. That's what the Gemara in Bava Basra says. Because you're under HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly. And also all derech eretz. You don't have to be under parnasa. Now, I want to just say what the Maharal says because it's an important point. I don't want this to be mistaken. It's not saying that you don't have to work for a living and you should take tzedakah. It's not saying that. It's not saying that once you serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you have the right and obligation to get other people to support you. I'm also not going to the other extreme and saying that's bad. If you look at the Be'er Halacha, he encourages it. The Be'er Halacha encourages someone who can learn Torah, even if it means he's taking money from the community. He should learn Torah and it will be a benefit to the community. It's a zchut to them. But it's not saying here that you have the right and obligation. But if we're medaik in the words of the Rabbeinu Yonah again, he doesn't say here that you don't have derech eretz at all. He says, Lo yitztarech la'asot melacha harbeh l'tzorech parnaso. You won't have to be subjugated to your work. You won't have to be living for an existence where your job obligates you and that your hours in the office even beyond your natural. Your mind won't be all caught up in your business and parnasa and where will I get it from? It's not saying you won't work, but rather it's saying, uva ma'at, you'll be able to work the minimum, yaspik lo kedei chayav, and that will satiate you, that will satisfy you. You'll put in an amount of ishtadlus, and a Kodesh Baruch Hu will take care of the rest. Because the malacha of the tzaddik is mitbarech, v'nafsho simcha b'chalko. It's saying two things. Number one, the little that you do will get extra blessing. And number two, you're naturally satisfied with less. Someone who's under the all of Torah, he's not looking for luxury. He's not looking for cruises. He's not looking for chandeliers. He's not looking to get some fancy hat and his wife some fancy shtreimel. He's not looking to go on fancy vacations. He's someone who's in the base medrash and very content. He's very content. That's what gives him his sipuk anefesh. So again, I want to note, it's not saying that you're exempt from parnasa. You're obligated in parnasa, but your HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care with you with less effort, and you're satisfied with less. So let's just summarize that point of the Maharal. If you put yourself under Hashem, Hashem takes care of you. And the natural order of things that people need to do, you don't need to do. I just want to share an amazing story just for a moment. And then I want to share the thing from this week's Parsha as well. This is a true story. It happened in Bnei Brak a good 40 years ago. There was an Avrech who was learning 3 storim a day. And he was just making ends meet. He just had enough. And he went to Rav Shach. And he said to Rav Shach, Rebbe, I had an idea. I want to live a little more comfortably. I want to learn morning Seder and afternoon Seder, but night Seder I'm going to work. Just night Seder. And that way, I'll still be learning, still be morning Seder, afternoon Seder. I'll be a Koila Jungerman. But I'll have a little extra just to be a little more comfortable. So Rav Shach said to him, morning Seder, afternoon Seder, and evening Seder. Your learning is your life. Don't even think about it. Invest yourself in learning Torah. That wasn't the answer he was looking for. So he said, okay, thank you. And then he went and worked in the evening anyway. A bit of chutzpah there. Ask Torah if it suits you good. If it doesn't suit you, well, we're going to see what happens at the end of the story. So he started working night Seder. And he was getting more money. But at the end of the month, he didn't have more money in the bank. And he couldn't figure it out. But there was suddenly his washing machine broke. And there was a big expense on that. And then suddenly his child had like a tooth, something happened, and they had to pay a whole huge amount on dentist care. And when after a few months, when he was doing the calculation, he ended up with no more money, and night Seder he'd been working instead of learning. So he realized he made a mistake, and he kind of thought maybe Rav Shach had cursed him or something. So he wanted to go back to Rav Shach just to figure it all out, what's going on. So he went back to Rav Shach and he said, Rebbe, I want to just tell you what's happened, and I want to get an explanation from you. What's going on? So Shach said to him, it's very simple. When you makabel upon yourself all Torah, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes away the all of Malchus and all of Derech Eretz. You reach a higher level of Hashkacha. You say to Hashem, I'm devoting myself fully to you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you will be able to survive with less. You will be able to function with less. Things will work out for you that don't work out for normal people. But once you turn to Hashem and you say, Hashem, you know, it's good what you're doing for me, but I want to work more. Hashem says, you want to work? You think that if you work, there's normal level of Hashkacha? It's a midah connected midah. The level of Hashkacha that you look for is the level of Hashkacha you bet. Why do you think your washing machine hasn't broken for 7 years? You think that's normal? Suddenly the washing machine breaks. It wasn't a punishment. It was supposed to break 4 or 5 years ago. Just as long as you were under the special level of Hashkacha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took care of you. You think the child's tooth broke as a punishment? It's not punishment, it's the natural order. You want to be natural? That's natural. That's the natural order of things. These things happen. You lowered your level of Hashkacha, and that's what the second part of the Mishnah is saying. The call, this is a little harsh to say this about him, but the same print, the direction, the principle. The kol ha-porek mimenu al Torah. Now this is going, let's pause on the story I just told you now, because that's not to the same level of extreme. But anyone who's porek, that doesn't mean an average person who's just not investing as much in Torah learning. Porek means that you reject Hashem. It means you don't see Hashem in the world at all. Meaning you see this world purely as nature, purely as I'm going in alone, Hashem, I don't need you, I'm rejecting the concept of Hashkacha Bichla. When you reject Hashkacha, all you do is disconnect yourself. That's all you do. You think it harms Hashem? It doesn't harm Hashem, it harms you. It's a great story of Rabbi David Aaron. By David Aaron, I've told the story before, but I love it. It's worth telling again and again. There was a boy who became a Baal Tshuva under Rav David Aaron, and his mother came out for the wedding, and she was livid at Rabbi Aaron. You made my son a rebel. He's got payos. He doesn't eat in my house. You've made my son a fanatic. He doesn't eat in restaurants with me anymore, and he's not going to get a living. You are the fault of all this. Well, you know what, Rabbi? I don't believe in God. That was her big, scary statement. To Rabbi David Aaron just said to her very simply with a calm face, he said, if you choose to live in a godless world, that's the world you'll live in. Amazing. Listen to the words. HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists whether you like it or not. There's a level of Hashkacha which Hashem offers to you if you choose to accept it. You could have a deep relationship with Him and live life on a higher level if you want that. If you choose to live in a godless world, then you'll be subject to nature. And you know, in nature, then there's statistics. things cost money, accidents happen. Those things are all natural. I'm not saying it'll happen to you necessarily, but you're under the world of nature. That's your choice. You get to choose that. So anyone who's porek me'alav ol Torah, then what happens? Well, if you want to live under the world of nature, then you're going to have to pay for it. All malchus, there's going to be extra things you're going to have to pay for protection. All derech eretz, you're going to have to work much harder. You're going to be subject to your work now. Now, where do we see this in this week's parsha? I'm going to pause with this. I saw this in the Maharal has footnotes of Rabbi Yeshua Hartman, and he brings this Rashi on this week's parsha. How did he know that we were going to be learning this Mishnah in third parak of Pirkei Avos exactly on the first week of Devarim? He must be a Navi. So in the beginning of this week's parsha, and pasuk ches, let's find it here. The pasuk is Moshe Rabbeinu saying, "Re'eh natati lifenechem et haaretz, bo urshu et haaretz." See, I have given before you the land. Come and inherit the land. Rashi says, "Bo urshu ve'ein ma'arer b'davar." No one's going to make a fuss. No one's going to hold you back. You're going to be able just to go in and inherit it. There's going to be no one there to stop you. Meaning, what was the original plan supposed to be? The original plan, according to Rashi, was supposed to be, no one's going to try and stop you. All the goyim are just going to accept that and leave. And you'll be able to come in and just take over the land. Without any war, without any fights. Continues Rashi, Ve'einachem tzrichim lemilchama. You were supposed to just go in without any war. Ilu lo shalchu meraglim. But what did they say? They said, well, we want to go according to the normal laws of nature. We want to send meraglim, check out the land, see where it's good to go in. Is it dangerous? Is it safe? How many soldiers we need? But you're working according to nature. You're going to fight this land as if you're a normal human under the world of nature. You're not normal. You're Am Yisrael. You're under the hashgacha of Hashem. You don't need to send spies. You want to send spies? I'll let you send spies. What's the result? You're going to have to fight. If they wouldn't have sent spies, lo hayu tzrichim leklei zayin, they wouldn't have needed weapons. You and HaKadosh Baruch Hu work hand in hand. The more you trust in Him, the more you accept upon yourself the old Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you're not subject to the world. That shir that I gave of Einot Vado, I called it "Not Subject to the World." That was the name of the shir. It's on Sfaria if you want to look it up. You're not subject to the world. This is the example from the sixth parsha. You can go in and just take over the land. The more trust you have in Hashem, the more emunah you have in Hashem. It's not talking about old Torah, meaning learning Torah. It's talking about accepting upon yourself a hanhaga of Torah. Hashem runs the world through Torah. There's an hanhaga of nature. There's an hanhaga of Bechira Chovshis, and there's an hanhaga of Torah. The lowest level is dog-eat-dog, determinism, level of nature. You can live your life on that level. The next nature is Bechira Chovshis. I can determine the world. I can choose the world. I can work things out. I don't need Hashem. That's the second level. The highest level is that you live in a world of Torah. You live in a world of Hashem. You live in a world where you rise above those basic levels. That's your choice, my friend. You get to choose which level you learn on. You will have many tests throughout your life where you can do something in a way which is basic hishtadlus like Rabbeinu Yonah. I'm not being extreme here. I'm not saying you should stop any hishtadlus. Rabbeinu Yonah. You can go through your life doing the amount of hishtadlus that's normal, given in any society, whatever's expected. Nothing luxurious, just a normal level of society. And from that point on, have trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you will see Yad Hashem in your life. You will see Hashgacha Pratis. You will feel that connection to Him. Or you could say, Hashem needs a little bit of help. You know, help. He needs help. The minimum is not enough. Hashem needs me to be involved in here and be involved in there. And the more you occupy yourself in this world, Hashem will say, okay, I'll give it to you. My pleasure. You want to take over, you can take over. But then the level you'll have will only be as great a level as you can give. That, my friends, is a beautiful interpretation based on the Maharal with the support from Rabbeinu Yonah of Kolam. And I recommend it. I recommend being makabel upon yourselves, old Torah. You will live a higher level of existence. Okay, that was the end. I just want to give an announcement. Tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, at the same time, I'm going to have someone send it out on the group. There was a request by one of the boys in Shana Bet, and I'm going to respect it. I started a series of a 3-part series for Shana Bet and upwards, although I don't mind if Shana Aleph come now as well, of Shalom Bayis, Chinuch Bonim, and Shidduchim. So the real order was supposed to be first Shidduchim, and then Shalom Bayis, and then Chinuch. But I did the one on Chinuch already. I did the one on Shalom Bayis already, but I haven't done the one on Shidduchim. And we're now in the last week of Zman. I don't want to let that pass. So the same time of our Musa Seder tomorrow night, let's call it 8:45 so I can get back from Mariv. So 8:45 tomorrow evening at this time, and it's open for everybody. There's going to be guidelines to Shidduchim. That's going to be what the shir is going to be tomorrow night. Yashar Koach. Have a good night.